Hey guys, Molten here, and welcome back to my new series where I'll be going through some of my favorite classical games from the past. So especially in the modern era, I think it's very important that players don't forget where all these ideas first originated from and all the wonderful gems played by all the world's best players at the time. So the first few videos will be focused mainly on the power of the pawns, so stick around and I hope you enjoy the video. So the following game was played between Eduard Gutfeld and Lubomir Kovalek, and it's one of my favorite examples of pawn phalanxes as well as how to use pawn majorities against pieces. So the game started as a Spanish with e4, e5, and we have bishop to b5 here. Black played bishop to c5, c3, threatening d4. Black challenges the center of f5 and white re-challenges with the pawn move pawn to d4. All fairly principled chess so far. White takes on e4, and here the best move for white is actually to capture on c6, and after the recapture back, white wants to take here on e5, and the idea is to bring the queen to h5 with check. Black should drop the bishop back, and after queen h5 check, play the move pawn to g6. Now this at first looks like a mistake because white can just take on g6, because if we recapture, white will just take the rook on h8. But this is actually a mistake, and white shouldn't go for this because black can play the move knight to f6, attacking the queen. Now the queen has to stay along the h-file in order to maintain the pin on the rook. So let's say the queen goes to h4. So we can't take the knight because the rook is hanging, so we should play the move rook to g8. And at first the knight has to move, let's say to e5. We take the pawn on g2, and it looks like white has achieved quite a lot because white's going to castle queen side, our whole king side is completely in ruins, and he has a very strong knight and aggressive looking pieces. However, let's say white plays the move bishop to g5 here. Black is already completely winning because black can play the move bishop takes e5 here, and after pawn takes, we just go bishop to g4. So we're threatening queen d3 as well as queen d1 immediately. And the attack is just way too fast, and there's no way for white to get his king to safety in time. So if we go back, after the move pawn to g6, white should drop the queen back to e2 instead. And this line is meant to be a little bit better for white, and it's still definitely playable for black, but white has some advantage. So in this game, white played the move knight g5 instead, and then black dropped the bishop back to b6. And here white played the move pawn to d5, which is already a slight mistake because it allows black to play a very strong counter with pawn to e3. So instead of moving the knight, black just counters by attacking the knight on g5, blocking the defense of the bishop on c1, and also attacking the pawn on f2. White played the move knight to e4, and here black, instead of moving the knight, plays again another counter-attacking move, queen to h4. So notice every move black is playing here is just looking to counter-attack instead of moving our piece away. And this is something you should look to do in your games. Queen f3 was played. Here black should have just taken the pawn, and after king f1, play knight f6, which would have been a better version of what we got in the game. Instead, black played knight f6, and we have captures. Black should take here with the pawn, and black loses the knight on c6. I think white can also just take here with bishop takes e3, which would have been a good option. And if bishop takes e3, white can throw in this move pawn to g3, and this way we don't run into any of the positions we got in the game. We have pawn takes c6. Black throws in this important in-between check. King goes to d1, and then we take here with the d pawn, which is very important because now we're threatening bishop to g4, creating this skewer on the king and queen. The white king is very awkwardly placed at the moment, so black has full compensation for the sacrificed material. So bishop e2 is necessary. Bishop e6. And here white goes for the immediate exchange of queens because he's a piece up, so it makes logical sense to do so. However, even with the queen traded off, black still has a very strong initiative. King e7. b3 was played. The threat is to play bishop to a3 and get the king to a very awkward square. So black plays bishop to d5, vacating the e6 square. So the plan here for black is he needs to get these pawns on the f and e file pushed up as far as possible. And preferably he wants to put pressure and win this g2 pawn as well. Bishop a3 check, we have king e6. Bishop g4, f5, bishop h3, and then rook h to g8, attacking the g2 pawn. So black is threatening to take it with the rook or the bishop. We have knight to d2, bishop takes g2, takes. So materially now black is totally fine already because there's more than enough pawns for the sacrificed piece. But his idea is to push these pawns forward as quickly as possible. So after rook to f1, he doesn't take the pawn on h2, instead plays the move rook to d2. A very nice concept, as we'll see. After king to e2, white unpins with the idea of knight to c4, and he wants to take the bishop and then capture the pawn on f2, after which it'll be very difficult for black to make some progress. So black comes up with a very nice idea, plays the move rook takes d2, sacrificing an entire rook. And after king takes d2, just follows up calmly with pawn to e4. The idea is that despite being a whole rook down here for a couple of pawns, white can't make progress because his pieces are so badly placed, and there's nothing stopping these f and e pawns from marching up the board. So here white plays the move bishop to f8 with the idea, as we'll see next move, after black plays the move pawn to f4, white plays pawn to b4, getting the bishop outside the pawn chain, and the plan is to bring the bishop back to c5, trade off this bishop, and then it's going to be very difficult for black to break through because he can't get the king yet to the e4 square. Black plays the move rook to g5, so we'll see the idea of this move next, because after bishop to c5, black sacrifices another exchange with rook takes c5. Really great stuff here. And then bishop takes c5. And here we've sacrificed two exchanges already, but there's nothing white can do. The rooks can't stop the pawns from pushing up the board. So rook b1 was played. Black played the move pawn to f3. The idea is just to play e3, e2. Rook to b4 was played, tempting black to take this rook. But we're not interested because if we take it, then the king is still far away from the f4 square, which is where we want it to be to push e3. King f5 was played. White played rook to d4. So white is really trying to block this bishop from getting into the game. But now we're just in time, so black takes the rook. And after pawn takes, plays king f4. And here white decided to resign because there's no way for him to stop the pawn from getting to the third rank here with e3 next. And the rook is simply hopeless. So that's the end of this video. The next ones I'll look again at the power of the pawns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.